My name is Peter. I don't know if anyone of you know who I am. I'm one of the founders of Pirate Bay that most of you have used. And I've also been working quite a lot on internet activist projects for quite a long while. So 15 years or something, internet has been kind of my blood life. And I care quite a lot about it. And some of the other things I've been working on that you might have heard of is Flatter, a micropayment system that we've been working on for 10 years. Always trying to change the way the internet works and the way that people can find information and also the way that people can access information. It's been really important to me that everyone have equal access, and transparency is one of those things that are needed for equal access and equal information. And transparency, which is the topic today, I'm going to be totally transparent. I haven't prepared enough, but I hope it's going to be okay anyhow. So let's go. So first of all, transparency. What do you think about when you hear the word transparency? Probably states being transparent against you and so on. There are two things that I really want to talk about when it comes to transparency. And first of all, it's the idea that transparency is just for you looking into the state. That's good, and that's really like what we all think, but it's also about what you do with your own information. It's what company does with your information. It's also what you as a company, because I guess a lot of you might work in a startup or have your own project going. It's also about what you do that affect other people. And the second is that transparency and privacy are kind of violating each other. That in order to be transparent, you can't have privacy, and the opposite, which is not really true at all. I'm going to go over that quite a bit today. One of the projects that I've been working on quite a lot is WikiLeaks, which you probably heard about as well. So I've been helping WikiLeaks for a few years before, everything from hosting and media contacts and so on. And for me, that was really an eye-opener into what transparency can do. So a lot of the information that people leaked to WikiLeaks have been influencing everything from elections, right now in the US government, for instance, but also in African nations. It has been forcing banks to open up their tax audits and helping other countries to actually look into the way that they're acting themselves without knowing. So it's been really, really important, but also WikiLeaks has its own problems by not being transparent at all. So that's one of the reasons I don't work with them anymore. So, first of all, the common misconception of transparency versus privacy. This is what everyone, when we start talking about transparency, is that with the transparent system, internet, companies, whatever, you don't have privacy. But the idea of transparency is not really about your personal data. It's not about you and your whatever sexual habits you might have or whatever things you're writing to your friends. That's not what transparency is about. Transparency is fundamentally about if you do something, or a state does something, or someone does something that affects other people, then you need to be transparent about it. It is about power. So the more power you have, the more transparent you need to be. And this goes for everyone. And typically a state would need to be transparent about what they do, but you don't have to be transparent about, for instance, your sex life, but you do need to be transparent about your taxes. For that reason, because it affects other people. So you can have privacy, you must have privacy, but you also need to understand where the line goes. And as long as you don't affect other people, you're entitled to having that, keeping that private. So it's very, very understandable. Transparency it's a tool, it's not a solution. A lot of people think that if we have transparency and we know what's going on, we will be able to just stop that. That's not going to happen at all. Very common topic about this is ACTA. Do you remember the ACTA treaty? Anyone? So yeah, a few. I'll just go over the ACTA treaty. The ACTA treaty was a legislation from the US government where they wanted, especially Europe and Japan and some other big countries, to make what they called a trade agreement, which is not legislation, even though it was legislation. It was called a trade agreement, where you stopped counterfeiting. So it's anti-counterfeiting trade agreement. And the idea was that we would stop fake medicines that are dangerous, we would stop exploding batteries in phones that are fake and so on. But most of the ACTA treaty was really about censoring the internet and making sure that people that committed copyright infringement or patent infringement would get harsher sentences, and there would be lots of more fines. The treaty had something about if you passed a border, you would have to be checked, your computer would be checked for whatever could be illegally in the computer, and if you broke copyright, you would have to pay at the border and so on. It was a very, very invasive legislation. When ACTA was released, we only knew that ACTA was released. We couldn't find out what was inside the agreement, because that was secret. So in Sweden, there were 4 people that knew about the ACTA agreement, what was inside of it, that was from the government. And in Hollywood, there were about 400 people that knew what was inside, because they wrote most of the legislation. And we fought for ages and ages and ages about getting a leaked copy of ACTA, because we wanted so badly to know what we were going to vote on and how to influence our politicians. So of course we needed transparency, and we fought for transparency, and what happened is that people that were in power in the European Parliament and so on, they realized it's really important that something like this is transparent, so someone leaked a copy of this and put on WikiLeaks. And this happened every time it was updated, there was a new leak out there, and there was an outrage. And in the end, we were fighting and fighting, all of the internet activists, about stopping this trade agreement. And in the end, we kind of did that. We managed to get the European Parliament to say no to this. A few countries, Japan I think, signed the ACTA treaty. But the problem is that after we had this huge win in Europe that we stopped ACTA, we thought kind of the war is over. But what of course happened is that ACTA was just becoming something else. It became part of TTIP and the TPP treaties that are being negotiated right now. But we're still now, after the ACTA stuff, thinking about how we stopped it, and we're super happy. So, and now people have to be transparent, and we had some new legislation about transparency in the European Union, but it didn't really change anything. The problem is still there, but we thought we won, so then we just don't fight that fight anymore. So this is the problem with transparency. Just because you have it, you don't know, it doesn't solve anything. You have to use the transparency and what you find out through transparency. And this is something that we really don't talk so much about, because transparency is just a tool, but we need to find out what to do with it. So even if you have access to all of the data in the world, how do you find out what data is important to you or not? And also, like, even so, if you know all of this information about, for instance, Trump or his lookalike, he looks really just like Trump. Even if you know everything that's going on, we still have the problem that people are going to vote for Trump in the United States, even though we know that we have all of the information about him grabbing women and so on and being this really awful person. So transparency doesn't stop people like this, it just makes us understand he's bad. But what's the next thing? So we can't just fight for transparency, we have to fight for the intentions we have with transparency. Just as democracy isn't the thing we can just fight for democracy, what do you do when you have democracy? And we have this problem that we're very short-sighted when it comes to this. A very common problem we have right now with transparency is also like, for instance, here in Sweden, we discuss quite a lot about this TV license. And probably most of you are Swedish, you know that you have to pay a TV license if you have TV. The money goes to public service, to public broadcasting, so they can do investigative journalists and so on. And we have a discussion about how to get rid of that or putting that into taxes and so on. At the same time, we see that most newspapers, most media outlets have very limited resources, and they stop doing investigative journalism because it's very, very expensive. And we don't really see that we have to put money into investigations, we have to put money into dealing with things. We cannot just say that because we now have access to data, because the government agrees to be transparent, we don't need people to look into things. So for me, it's a problem when most of advertising in the world are the thing that funds investigative journalism, which is the case right now and when it comes to media, except for public broadcasting. So we need to look at, you know, what can we do with transparency? Sure, it's good to have the data, but what's the end goal? And I'm gonna show you a video clip from a really sad man who was thinking about this some years ago. Can we have some sound?
Josh?
I'll go back and try again. Let's see.
You gotta switch like cable.
It is plugged in. Okay, sorry. My fault. it's Joshua's fault. I'll blame him. So you probably know George Orwell, who wrote the book 1984 about the future. So this is not him, this is still Trump.
But he left one final warning.
1984 is, I believe, a quite terrifying masterpiece. So terrifying, in fact, I don't think I should like to read another like it.
I am not absolutely dissatisfied with it. I think it is a good idea, but the execution would have been better if I had not been under the influence of TB when I wrote it.
You once claimed that you have an ability to face unpleasant facts. Is that what you've demonstrated in 1984 by drawing an accurate portrait of the future?
I think that allowing for the book being, after all, a parody, something like 1984 could actually happen. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time. In our world.
So that man is really scary and depressive. But he wrote the book 1984, which is about the Big Brother society. And when listening to him back in ages ago, I realized that a lot of the things he said was very right. Like we are super surveillance today. We know about it, but we don't really do anything about it. We haven't abolished orgasm. The internet fixed that. I think because of Tinder and other things, we've had more orgasms than ever. But most of the things aren't really that good. But the problem I see is that we are kind of in a Matrix-like situation. You've all seen The Matrix or know about the dilemma that Neo is facing. He has two pills to swallow. One pill is where you can wake up and see what the world really looks like, and the other pill is that he stays in this fake world and doesn't have to know and care about things. And for me, it's like we swallow both of them. We know exactly what's going on. We know all of the problems, but we still decided to stay in the Matrix knowing about the problems. Because we're becoming really, really lazy for some reason. And we don't really work that much on fixing the problems we have in society. We much more care about having white paint on our walls in our IKEA furnished apartments. And for me, this is kind of a problem because we have all of these tools, we need all of these tools, but we don't really use them for anything. I've been to prison. Have anyone been to prison? Okay, one is lying, two is lying. No, but that's really good. There is a philosophical thing that makes it, when talking about transparency, I'm going to tell you a little story. Like, when you end up in prison, you're going to be locked up. The first thing you realize is that you go through some Kafkaesque kind of transformation from being a bug, from being a human, becoming a bug. No one really cares about you. But the biggest problem you have in prison is that no one can see what's going on. Like, there's no transparency. There's a French philosopher, Michel Foucault, who wrote a book about this called, I think, Prison and Discipline, where he was arguing that it's very unfair with the prison systems where you lock people up and you put them there because no one can see what's going on. And philosophically speaking, it would be better if you actually cut a thief's hand off, or maybe you could have punishments that are where you actually beat people on the streets publicly, because then people realize what's going on. So it's philosophically and morally more correct to beat someone as the state, because then people ask for less sentencing and more understanding of what's going on. But when you're in prison, then anything people talk about is like, how do we get harder punishments? How do we keep people locked up for a longer time? But there's no transparency in what's going on, so you don't have this idea of how people are being treated. You can't connect to that. And that's one of the things that are really, really important transparency, is that it makes you have to look into very ugly situations. Sometimes I even agree that it would be better to just be like beaten up heavily and not having to stay in prison. But another type of prison that we're voluntarily using, for instance, which is probably relevant to all of you, is the cloud. It's something everyone is moving into. It's exactly the same principle. Instead of being beaten up, which is caring about your own servers, you just let someone else do that, and you don't see what they're doing with your data. So it's like locking your data up in prison. But still, this is like the trend that we're not really discussing, like what's transparent about that. When Google have all of your information, or Facebook have all of your information, they also have all of the control over you. So it is kind of like a digital prison that we're striving for, and we're doing advertisement for this. And this for me is really not a really good situation. And the problem is that companies are becoming the new state that needs to be very transparent, but they don't have to be, because we haven't really forced companies to be that. And every time there's a problem with a company, let's say Google or Fingerprint or any of the companies that we discuss, there will always be someone saying like, oh, the market controls that, so it's not a big problem. It's always the market control. But speaking transparency about this, who is the market? We don't have a face to blame, it's just a name. So we don't really have transparency in today's society as long as we don't realize that capitalism, which is the basis for all of this, is not really a transparent system. You don't have transparency if you have capitalism, and capitalism cannot strive or cannot survive with transparency. So you have to decide, do you want a transparent society where you can actually influence and get to know what's going on, or you do want the market to control, whoever the market is. So transparency is of course not free. As I've been talking about before, we have to pay for transparency. We have to have public broadcasting and media outlets that can investigate for us. We have to decide that we have to give away some of our kind of private ideas about ourselves, like taxes and so on. We have to give up something for transparency, but the outcome is quite well. We get some sort of tool for controlling and running democracy. But everything has a trade-off. So I think it's worth, of course, to have a totally transparent society. Speaking about technology, which is kind of like my background, a lot of websites are being stopped on the internet, of course. And as most of my friends are technologists, we always laugh about how they're being censored on the internet because it's so easy to just bypass the censorship. And then we laugh and we say, haha, that didn't really work, and so on. Like, Pirate Bay that I helped start, it's been blocked in 60-something countries now, and we always laughed about that they don't stop us, and the traffic increases and so on. But another thing increases when you don't have an equal system. It's also like the class divider, the people that know how to bypass these things, and the other people who don't care about the thing because they can bypass it. So instead of having an equal society, you start by dividing. And that has also something to do with transparency, because we are not transparent as people on how to helping other people with technology and so on. And also about discussing the problems we have because of censorship. So we have ourselves to blame kind of for the censorship going on. Instead of stopping it at the beginning, which we should have, we just laugh about it and let it happen. And slowly, gradually go into some sort of like boiling frog phenomenon, where we know that this has been going on, we wouldn't like to have it, now it's been really, really bad, but it's too late to do something about it, so we can just leave it there. And that's not really a situation that's gonna be good for the future. Transparency is also about responsibility, and this is something that we're really lacking in today's society, where everything is merging into like some sort of market economy, and we have the biggest companies in the world who produce nothing. They just rely upon individual people to come and pay their taxes, do everything for them, and to just reap the benefits for it. So if we talk about transparency, we have to talk about responsibility. We have to talk about Uber and how they need to be responsible for the taxi drivers. We have to talk about Facebook and their responsibility towards our data, and so on. So it all intertwines into everything. It's also about open decision making. So the more we're building new societies based on technology, we have to be open about what technology we use. So when we talk about self-driving cars, we probably all heard the dilemma: who should I choose to hit if I have to hit this baby or this older woman? Who is the most important for the car not to hit? And we have to like code these ethical tweaks into cars. Who's less worthy? All of these decision making we're now putting into companies who are using this as sales arguments, and they're patenting all of the systems they're building. And that's not really transparent for our society. And we see a lot of the decisions that are being made in society pushed away from where we are, so we don't have local control anymore with more and more centralized governments. But most of all, technologists today are the people running the world, they're deciding the world, and they're making decisions for us. So when we talk about transparency, it needs to also be about transparent solutions for how you deal with everyday life and all of the kind of algorithms controlling us. We need to have the Facebook algorithm totally transparent and open source it, which is another thing. We need to also open source the things we do. Like we need to be transparent if we build a company and show other people why and how we do things. And the most important thing I would say is intent. What are your intentions for the data you're keeping? What are the intentions of the system you're building? And are you going to control that in the future? This is just an awesome picture. Ha 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 ha. My biggest problem though, and I'm going to end with this because I'm speaking way too long, is that transparency equals democracy equals very boring. During the last Danish election, which was a very, very important election in Denmark, where the extreme right wing were going to get even more votes than usual, this is the most viewed things on Danish TV 1 hour before election closes. So you can see that the Swedish royal wedding is more popular than the Danish election. And for me, it is weird that Danes are more interested in foreign monarchy than their own democracy. And this is the problem that we need to fix. So transparency is super great, but we need to get to a place where people care about that to begin with. So thanks for me, and if you have any questions, I think we have like 10 minutes left.